anytime a politician says that something is climate change, I try to go to the experts, or at least the person who speaks for the experts, and digest the experts' reports in a way that normal people like you and I can understand. So I went directly to Michelle Stirling from Friends of Science, actually went directly to Friends of Science YouTube page to see, does Michelle have a video yet debunking this theory? It's not even a theory anymore. It's, I would suggest, according to the politicians, unquestionable science that what happened in Jasper was a result of climate change and absolutely nothing else. However, smarter people have different opinions while they still can. And so joining me now is my friend Michelle Stirling from Friends of Science to tell us what the experts have been saying about Jasper for a very long time. So I guess I'll just turn it over to you. You take it away.
Oh, well, thank you, Sheila. Thanks for having me on the show. And I do want to reiterate, I'm not a forestry expert, but I do work with forestry and wildland fire experts. So I get their information and I try and translate it into something that is plain language enough for most of the public to understand. So, of course, the thesis is that the Jasper wildfires and that the 2023 wildfires were all caused by climate change, and the climate change was driven by human-induced GHG emissions from big oil. So there's actually, even on the heels of the Jasper tragedy, an open letter of 80 environmental groups blaming big oil for the Jasper wildfire, which is just ludicrous. First of all, it's not true. For the longest time, British Columbia and Alberta have been deeply infested by mountain pine beetle, and it gets into the bark of the trees and ultimately just kills the tree. So then we now have like 18 million hectares of standing deadwood in British Columbia and Alberta. And it encroached into the park. And I understand that some years ago, when it first hit BC, Alberta wanted to, go in and aggressively take out that small patch because they were afraid it would spread. But of course, people like Sephora Berman, who led the tar sands campaign and also prior to that led the war in the woods to stop logging in Glycott Sound, they made it almost impossible for anybody to cut down a tree, because to these rabid environmentalists and climate activists, every tree is totally sacred, even if it's dead and life-threatening to your community. So it's not climate change. It's because there are hectares of land filled with these dead trees, and you can see that they're dead because their needles go red. Right. So it's not a maple tree, Yeah. So they go kind of yellowish, then they go red, then they go gray, and then they go black, and then they burn. So these are very, very dangerous fuel loads that have built up. And if we don't go in and log them out or burn them out with controlled burns, then we're going to have more wildfires like this. And it's been known for a long time. It's in parks management reports. So, of course, it's difficult when you're a tourist site, because the reality is that people come there to see the trees. They want to see it in a natural state. They don't like it when there's a forest fire burning, if you're doing a controlled burn. So it's an awkward public relations issue. So it seems like it's gotten pushed off to the side quite a bit, in the hope that people will love seeing all these dense conifers. But if you watch our video, you'll see that back in the day, and the information comes directly from a Parks Canada report, or report for Parks Canada, you'll see that back in the day there was much more mixed vegetation, more deciduous trees, smaller shrubs and such like. These were burned off in the early days of Jasper, probably around the 1913, I think it is, when it was called Fitzhugh. There was a huge fire that just went all the way up and down that mountain parkway, if you like. And that's why all these stands are pretty much the same, because it burned off a lot of that vegetation. And since then, we haven't allowed the kind of wildfires that would restore that vegetation. So now it's like all dense conifers, very difficult to even navigate through these kinds of trees.
Yeah, the forest is all aging at once thanks to artificial fire suppression instead of controlled burns. And there's something so ironic in all of this. The other side of this debate says that it is climate change causing the fires, but it really was the lack of global warming that caused the pine beetle to sort of be stopped in its tracks as it marched its way through our forest, because pine beetle suffers winter kill after extended -40. And so we got extended -40, and that stopped the march of the pine beetle through the forest, but it didn't eliminate the deadfall. I went through the timeline, and I know you did a bit of it too. So what we know for sure is in 2017, Conservative MP Jim Aglinski, who was the MP there at the time, and the mayor of Jasper were warning. That's 2017. Then 2018, there's multiple experts coming out and saying their words were, it's just a matter of time. Then in 2020, we've got Parks Canada officials testifying at the House of Commons, I think it was the Environment Committee, saying that there was a dangerous fuel load level in the park. And then in 2022, Parks Canada's own report says that not enough was being done to clear out the fuel load. And here we are 2 years later. And it would have been inevitable if they had done more, I think, to eliminate the pine beetle. But as you point out, the left has made it nearly impossible to cut a tree in this country.
Mm-hmm. And, it's also not easy to do a controlled burn, especially in that Jasper area, because we were just talking before we went on air there. Jasper's right in a basin of sort of three valleys. The wind changes rather rapidly. And, it can get away on you. And especially when you have all that dead wood all around, that fuel load. So it isn't easy to do a controlled burn. But, there are things that could be done, like logging companies could take all that dead wood out, and there may be a way to turn it into something useful. Like, for instance, you could burn it to make electricity. I think Grand Prairie has a biomass plant. Because it's not necessarily good for other things. I don't know, maybe you can make it into kitty litter or wood pellets or something like that. But what I'm saying is, like, get it out of there. And the mechanical extraction, especially on the off seasons when A, there's not very many tourists around, and B, the risk of actually lighting a fire because of the sparks or such like that might come from using mechanical tools in that environment, would be less. Again, in that area, I'm not an expert, but we do know that we have to get rid of as much of this fuel load as we can, especially when it's near these precious sites. Apparently, Banff is also primed for such a tragedy. And I will say, I think it was a Calgary Herald report about Banff, and that they had actually closed off one of the streets downtown to make it into a pedestrian mall. This is the kind of thing that happened in Paradise in California, where they decided to make their town a bit more quaint. It used to have 2 lanes in and out, so they shut down one of the lanes on each side to make it more pedestrian friendly. And unfortunately, when that fire hit, people couldn't get out in their cars. You had 1 or 2 cars that stalled or burst into flames, and there was no other path. So, you really have to take these unthinkable events seriously, because they can happen.
While you and I are considering practical ways to deal with the forest, environmental NGOs, they've already started banding together. As you say, some 80 NGOs and health and civil society groups have issued an open letter to the federal government and provincial leaders in response to the Jasper Park fires. You write that their demands are not for more water bombers, not for more firefighters or bucket scoopers. They want the Canadian government to cap oil and gas emissions and block financing to fossil fuel producers.
Yeah, it's just so ludicrous. I mean, first of all, how do you fight a wildfire without heavy equipment, without water bombers, without choppers, without the wildland firefighters? How do you get them in and out of there safely? How do you evacuate a town? I mean, congratulations to Jasper and the emergency management people, because they did such a great job of getting everybody out lickety-split and safely. Like, it could have been much worse. But how do you do that without fossil fuels? You're going to run everybody out of town on an EV? Are you kidding me? You can't run heavy equipment on batteries. So you need diesel. And that's how they're doing all the fire breaks. They send in a big dozer and take out, I don't know, a mile fire break. It's a lot of work. And we have another video actually about Yellowknife and how last year, when the wildfire was encroaching on Yellowknife, there was a skeleton crew of volunteers left behind. And these guys jerry-rigged all kinds of water cannons and sprinklers to protect the town. They cleared something like 40 acres of land in just a few days, really like working around the clock. But it's amazing what they did. And I think everybody can maybe look at that and get an idea of what needs to be done. It doesn't look very pretty, of course. They just did it to protect the town. But think of how you could do that for your community and do it in a pretty way. You could maybe have a walking trail around the town that's in a fire break, for instance. You could do something that is functional, a fire break, and useful to the community. But you need to start doing it now and not when the fire is encroaching on your town.